Welcome back to Doc Tensors. You know, we love to go deep on the coolest new machine learning papers, and today we've got one that's really shaking things up when it comes to how we think about AI and medical diagnosis.
It's a super interesting area. And this paper titled Dialogue is Better Than Monologue, Instructing Medical LLMs via Strategical Conversations. Well, it's really making waves by exploring how training AI to essentially think through dialogue can actually lead to more accurate and robust medical reasoning.
Yeah, I mean, the core idea here is pretty mind-blowing, right? Instead of just feeding these AI systems tons of static information, like, those massive medical textbooks or exam questions, they're training them on conversations that are a lot like those back-and-forth interactions that doctors have with patients in the real world.
That's exactly it. I mean, the researchers behind this paper, they noticed something pretty important. They saw that while traditional medical AI is really good at certain tasks, like analyzing medical images, it often hits a wall when it comes to the complexities of real-world diagnosis.
Right, because diagnosing a patient is rarely straightforward.
Yeah, and they realized that what was missing was this dynamic back-and-forth process, the way doctors gather information, ask questions, and refine their hypotheses through dialogue with patients. It's not just about knowing the facts, it's about how you apply them in a real-world setting.
So instead of just memorizing a bunch of medical facts, these AI systems are learning to sort of think like detectives, asking the right questions and piecing together clues based on the responses they get.
Exactly. And to really test this idea, they created this benchmark they call Muddy Maze. And it's pretty clever. It presents these complex medical cases that involve multiple steps and throws in some irrelevant information, mimicking those real-world challenges doctors face when trying to figure out what's going on with the patient.
That's like a real-life diagnostic puzzle with all the red herrings and complexities that doctors have to navigate every day.
Exactly. Really puts these medical LLMs to the test.
So what happened when they tested these models? How did those trained on dialogue stack up against the ones trained on traditional static data?
The results were pretty remarkable, actually. Across the board, the models that were trained on dialogue just consistently outperformed the ones trained on static data. And this was at all difficulty levels.
So regardless of how complex the case was, the dialogue-trained models had the edge.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is they were especially good at those multi-step reasoning tasks, where you have to connect different pieces of information to arrive at a diagnosis.
Right, like piecing together a puzzle.
Exactly. They were also better at accurately picking out the most important information, even when there was a lot of irrelevant data thrown in there to distract them.
It sounds like these conversational AI systems are developing some serious diagnostic skills.
It's really impressive. And if we look back at the history of medical AI, you can see how this breakthrough builds on those earlier advancements.
Oh, I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah.
How did we get from those early AI systems to these sophisticated dialogue-trained models?
Well, those early systems were very rule-based. Medical experts would have to spend tons of time manually encoding all this medical knowledge into a set of if-then statements.
So it was very rigid and not very good at handling the uncertainties and nuances that come up in real-world medicine.
Yeah, exactly. Then came machine learning, which allowed AI to actually learn from data instead of being explicitly programmed. And that led to some big progress, especially in areas like image recognition and disease prediction. But even then, the focus was still mostly on giving AI huge amounts of static data.
It was still a very passive form of learning, just absorbing information without really engaging with it.
And that's where this paper marks a big shift. By incorporating dialogue into the training process, it's not just about what the AI knows, but how it learns to think and reason. It's about mirroring those cognitive processes that doctors use every day, constantly gathering information, refining their understanding, and adjusting their approach based on what the patient tells them.
It's like teaching AI to think like a doctor, not just mimic one.
Precisely. And that has the potential to totally revolutionize how we develop and apply medical AI in the future. Imagine AI assistants that can actively participate in medical discussions, analyze complex cases alongside doctors, and even provide personalized recommendations based on those back-and-forth conversations with patients.
That sounds incredible. It's like having a virtual medical consultant by your side, helping you make the best possible decisions for your patients.
Yeah, and the really interesting part is why this dialogue training works so well.
I was just going to ask you about that. Is it simply that it's a more engaging way for AI to learn, or is there something deeper going on here?
Well, it actually ties back to the fundamental nature of clinical reasoning. Think about how a doctor goes about diagnosing a patient. They don't just jump to conclusions. They start with a wide range of possibilities and then systematically narrow them down by gathering information, asking those key questions, and refining their hypotheses based on the patient's responses.
It's like they're solving a mystery, each question and answer revealing a new clue.
Exactly. And here's where information theory comes in. Every piece of information that AI gets through dialogue is like reducing the uncertainty, guiding it towards a more accurate diagnosis. It's kind of like eliminating suspects in a detective novel until you're left with the one who did it.
Ah, I love that analogy. So it's not just about memorizing medical textbooks. It's about learning how to strategically ask questions, gather information, and use that information to refine your understanding.
Yes. And that aligns perfectly with how human doctors think and reason.
So it's not only an effective training method, but it's also a more natural and intuitive way to teach AI about the intricacies of medicine.
Absolutely. And now comes the really cool part, how they actually put this dialogue training into practice. They had to figure out how to transform those static medical data sets, the textbooks, the medical exams, into something that resembled a conversation.
That sounds like a pretty big challenge. How did they manage to do that?
Well, they used another fascinating technique. It really is a clever approach. You can't just, throw a medical textbook at an AI and expect it to suddenly know how to have a conversation about a patient's symptoms.
Well, it needs some guidance.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They needed a structured approach, a way to create these back and forth exchanges that actually mimicked a real doctor-patient interaction.
So how'd they do it? Do they, hire a bunch of screenwriters to come up with medical dialogue?
That's funny, but no, it's actually even more interesting than that. They used another large language model, one that was already really good at generating human-like text.
So it's like AI training AI. That's pretty meta.
It is. It's fascinating stuff. They basically gave this language model a set of instructions, a template to follow. Imagine saying something like, okay, take this medical case and turn it into a dialogue between a doctor and a patient, but make sure to include these specific pieces of
Then
information.
the language model would just spit out a simulated conversation based on that template.
Exactly. They created this sort of training ground for the medical AI, a place where it could practice its conversational skills before it had to deal with real-world medical cases.
And they had to do this for both the multiple choice questions and the longer medical articles, right? Because those are two very different types of information to work with.
Yeah, that's right. It was a bit of a challenge. For those multiple choice questions, they had to transform them into a dialogue where the doctor's asking all the right questions to figure out which answer makes the most sense. And for those articles, they had to break down these long, dense paragraphs into a more conversational flow, like a doctor explaining a complex medical concept to a patient who's not a medical expert.
So they're teaching the AI to translate between the technical language of medical textbooks and the everyday language people use when they talk about their health.
That's exactly it. And that's such a crucial skill for any AI that's going to be interacting with real people in a medical setting.
This makes me wonder, could this kind of approach be used for other things besides healthcare? What about translating legal jargon into plain English? Or making those super complicated scientific papers easier for the average person to understand?
Oh, absolutely. That idea of using AI to bridge these communication gaps is really powerful. It could have tons of applications in so many different fields.
It's a game changer for sure.
Okay.
Okay, so back to the paper. Tell me more about how they actually evaluated the AI's performance in that muddy maze. What were they looking for to see if the dialogue training was really making a difference?
Well, they didn't just want to know if the AI got the final diagnosis right. They wanted to dig deeper and understand how it was actually arriving at that diagnosis. They were interested in whether the AI was actually reasoning like a human doctor would, following a logical chain of thought.
So the process of getting to the answer was just as important as the answer itself.
Right. Because in medicine, it's not just about being right. It's about understanding why you're right. They used a few different metrics, but one of the key ones was this thing called multi-hop accuracy. And that measures the AI's ability to connect different pieces of information, kind of like solving a puzzle, to reach a diagnosis.
Ah, so it's not just about knowing a bunch of isolated medical facts. It's about understanding how those facts relate to each other. Just like a doctor has to piece together all the symptoms, test results, and patient history to come up with a diagnosis.
Exactly. And the AI models that were trained on dialogue consistently showed higher multi-hop accuracy, which means they were better at building that logical chain of reasoning, just like a human doctor.
They also looked at something called single-wise accuracy, which, if I remember correctly, measured how well the AI could predict the next logical step in the reasoning process, right?
Yeah, that's right. It was basically testing whether the AI could anticipate what a human doctor would do next, given the information they had at each stage. It was about seeing if they were developing a sort of medical intuition.
So they weren't just following a predetermined path, they were actually able to think ahead and make strategic decisions based on the information they gathered.
That's a great way to put it. It was like watching them learn to improvise.
Like a jazz musician who knows all the scales and chords, but can also riff and create something new in the moment.
Exactly. And earlier I mentioned information theory and how it relates to all of this. Would you like to hear more about that?
Oh, yeah, definitely. You were talking about how each question the AI asks and each piece of information it gathers is like reducing the uncertainty, guiding it closer to the correct diagnosis.
Right. It's like they're starting with this big block of marble, and each piece of information they get is like chiseling away at it until they reveal the sculpture hidden inside.
So it's not just about knowing a lot of medical facts. It's about knowing which questions to ask, which tests to order, which pieces of information are most relevant to the case at hand.
And that's exactly how human doctors approach diagnosis too. They start with a differential diagnosis, a whole bunch of possible explanations, and then they use their clinical reasoning skills to eliminate those possibilities until they're left with the most likely one.
This whole concept of uncertainty reduction through dialogue is so fascinating. And it
hmm
seems like that's really the key to why this training method is so effective.
I think so. It
Ye-
highlights the importance of not just knowing the what in medicine, but also the how.
It's not just about memorizing the textbook. It's about learning how to think like a doctor.
That's it. And that's why this research is so groundbreaking. It's not just about making AI smarter, it's about making it more human in its thinking. It's about bridging the gap between the cold, hard logic of a computer and the nuanced, intuitive reasoning of a human doctor.
It's about teaching AI to be more like a clinician, a detective, a scientist, all rolled into one.
Exactly. And now, are you ready to move on to some of the really exciting possibilities that this research opens up? We can explore those novel notions, where this whole idea of dialogue training could lead us in the future.
Welcome back to Talk Tensors. We've been having a fascinating conversation about this paper that's using dialogue to train AI for medical diagnosis, and it's really pushing the boundaries of what AI can do in healthcare.
It is, yeah. And what this research shows is that teaching AI to reason through conversation isn't just a cool idea, it's actually changing how we think about building intelligent systems, especially in medicine.
Exactly. We've talked about how those traditional AI training methods that rely on static data, they just don't quite cut it when it comes to the complexity of real-world diagnosis. And how this new approach, using dynamic conversational interactions, is leading to AI that can actually think more like a human doctor.
We've come a long way from those early rule-based systems.
For sure. We saw how they're actually implementing this dialogue training using another language model to transform those textbooks and medical cases into these simulated conversations. It's like creating a boot camp for these medical AIs.
Yeah, and we also talked about how they're evaluating these AI models using metrics that go beyond just checking if they got the right answer. They're actually looking at the entire reasoning process, how well the AI can connect those different pieces of information and anticipate the next logical step, just like a human doctor would.
Exactly. And what's really exciting to me is that this approach isn't just about improving diagnostic accuracy. It's about developing AI that can truly understand and reason about complex medical concepts.
Yeah, it's like teaching them to think like a doctor, not just mimic one.
So it's not just about having access to a massive database of medical knowledge. It's about knowing how to apply that knowledge in a dynamic and nuanced way, just like a skilled physician would.
Absolutely. And that opens up so many possibilities for how we can use AI to improve healthcare. Imagine a future where AI assistants can not only help doctors diagnose diseases, but also explain those diagnoses in a way that patients can actually understand, tailor treatment plans to individual needs, and even provide emotional support throughout a patient's healthcare journey.
It's like having a personalized AI healthcare companion.
Yeah, and it's not just about improving healthcare for individuals either. This technology could also have a huge impact on public health initiatives like monitoring outbreaks or developing those preventative care strategies that are tailored to specific populations.
It's incredible to think about the potential impact on healthcare at both the individual and societal levels.
It really is. Now, before we wrap up, let's move on to my favorite part of the show, novel notions, where we get to brainstorm some of those exciting new research avenues that this paper has inspired.
I love this part. What groundbreaking ideas has this research sparked for you?
Well, if this dialogue training can lead to such amazing progress in medical AI, what if we use this same principle in other fields that rely heavily on complex reasoning? Like, what about law?
Oh, that's a fascinating thought.
Right. What if, instead of just feeding AI systems tons of legal statutes and precedents, we trained them on simulated courtroom arguments, where the AI has to learn how to anticipate objections, construct persuasive arguments, and change its strategy based on what the opposing counsel does?
It'd be like putting these AI lawyers through a series of mock trials, honing their ability to think strategically and critically in the heat of a legal battle.
Exactly. And it doesn't stop there. Imagine training AI scientists on the dialogues of scientific debates, where they learn how to formulate hypotheses, design experiments, analyze data, and defend their findings against scrutiny.
It's like giving them a crash course in the scientific method, but through conversation and debate.
Right. We could potentially speed up scientific discoveries, allowing AI to collaborate with human scientists in a more meaningful way.
The possibilities are mind-blowing. It seems like this dialogue training could really unlock a new level of sophistication and adaptability for AI across a wide range of fields.
It's really exciting. And of course, we need to be mindful of those ethical considerations, make sure these AI systems are developed responsibly and transparently, and always prioritize human control and oversight.
Those are all important points. But if we approach this carefully and thoughtfully, this research could pave the way for a future where AI isn't just a tool, but a true partner in helping us solve complex problems, make better decisions, and ultimately create a better world.
I think so. It's definitely a vision worth striving for. And this paper, with its innovative approach to AI training, is a big step in the right direction.
Well said. And on that note, that wraps up our deep dive into dialogue is better than monologue, instructing medical LLMs via strategical conversations. We hope you enjoyed exploring this groundbreaking research with us today.
And if you want to learn more about the technical details, be sure to check out the link to the full paper in the show notes.
And be sure to join us next time for another exciting journey into the world of cutting-edge machine learning research.